Good morning, everybody. Thank you so much for showing up bright and early at 9 a.m. This is a very unexpected surprise, given the getting here and getting through security, so thank you for that. My name is Justin Queso. I'm a technology policy and international advisor for IGF. And what we have here today is we're going to discuss security, privacy, and the ethical dimensions of ICTs in 2030. So basically what we're going to do is we're trying to envision what the future will look like and what we need to do now to ensure that it's a beneficial future, looking at it through those lenses. And today we have a group, quite a group of panelists here, a diverse group of panelists. And so the important thing, though, is from our view, this session is about the participants. So we have no slides. Our speakers are only going to speak for about 5 minutes, and then it's going to open up to all of you for questions. So this is your chance. I get to talk to them all the time, so I get to have these discussions, so this is the chance for all of you to ask the questions you want to ask them. And believe me, you'll really enjoy what they have to say. So first, I'd like to introduce Meher here, and
good morning, everyone.
And I just wanted to ask you to basically describe a little bit what you're doing in your work in Tunisia, and also some of the challenges you faced, and also some of the things that you find well, such as the education along with connecting people, and how that plays into having a more beneficial future for your country.
All right. Thank you very much, Justin. I'm very honored to be among you here today. I feel really privileged to have the opportunity to talk about Tunisia and the project that we're currently doing. So again, my name is Meher Bnouni. I am the Secretary General for IEEE Site Tunisia section, which was newly established. So for those of you who don't know Tunisia, it's that little country on the top of North Africa. So yeah, you do know it. All right. Good to know that. So yeah, one thing you have to know about Tunisia is that we don't really have lots of natural resources. And since our independence, like 60 years ago, we focused on two main pillars, two main points: education and health. And ever since our independence, that path kind of deviated a little bit. And there became a gap between, a digital gap between the city and rural areas. So a lot of people don't have the minimum knowledge about internet connectivity. So when we started about our project, and our main project in IEEE Site Tunisia is called Tawasul. Tawasul in Arabic means connectivity. So what we're doing is we're trying to not only pay attention to rural areas who don't have access to internet, but also revolutionize education in Tunisia. So in this little 5 minute, I'm going to try to walk you through how we envision Tunisia in 2013, as far as ICT, of course, is concerned. So our project's purpose is to create an internet-empowered next generation. And how are we going to do that? We're going to start, as I said, by connecting schools in Tunisia, especially in rural areas. So we set a deadline, and we're going to start by connecting 2 schools before the end of 2016, and then we're going to expand, and we're going to be connecting 24 schools, 1 school per state, before the end of 2017. But the project doesn't stop there. Of course, we're going to start by education, and then we're going to expand and reach out the whole community. And of course, why do we start from education? As I said, because education is one important pillar in Tunisia, and we have to focus on that. And one other thing, if you introduce a revolutionary technology to children, through their enthusiasm, through their passion, they're going to pass it on to their parents, and who are definitely like leaders, community leaders, who are businessmen. So internet connectivity will expand in different parts of the country in many fields. So what we're going to be doing, we're going to provide a simple solution that consists of providing a periodically updating content, like educational content, sharing it to in schools for and focusing on STEM education, because we went to a school in a rural area in Tunisia, and we gave them like a little scratch workshop programming, and there was this 14-year-old boy. He didn't have a computer, but he talked to me about Python, C++, Arduino, and I'm a second-year engineering student, and I've just learned these things. So imagine if these children have the right circumstances, are surrounded with the right people, and have the right technologies and so on to learn. Imagine what they can do. And not to mention those who don't have computers, who like people in rural areas. Imagine what capacities and what people, what great minds might be hiding over there. So yeah, this is basically what we're doing. And as I said, the project doesn't stop there. We're going to be also doing innovation hubs, a place for children and for basically everyone who has like great ideas as far as ICT is concerned. We're going to provide them with the right tools, with the everything that they need to start their projects and so on. So yeah, as Justin said, please, this is an interactive workshop show, so feel free to interrupt or ask questions at any time.
Okay, we'll get through the panelists first, and then we will get to that point. But you know, one of the things I know we had talked about is not only are you connecting the schools, but the gender balance is very close to 50-50, sometimes even better than 50-50 in certain situations. Could you maybe talk a little bit about how you all are doing that?
Absolutely. In fact, in Tunisia, gender equality is something like really obvious. Women had the right of vote like very long time ago. And through our project, we're going to be trying to focus a lot on gender equality. For instance, and in fact, it's not just, we're not really pushing this. We're not really pushing that. It's like children are pulling it, and especially girls. When we gave this workshop in a school, people like girls and children didn't really have a great idea about the internet and what they can, like the opportunities and the possibilities that it offers. And she said, like, we talked to her about how she can still create a website and so on. And she said, oh, okay, I can sell my homemade products online. So imagine, like, she's already a social entrepreneur. And if she has the right skills, imagine what future she can have, and what the change she can make into her community.
Wow, that's great, and that definitely goes towards achieving the SDGs on gender equality and learning for girls and women.
Absolutely.
That's amazing. So next, I'd like to turn it over to Greg here, and. Greg is a cybersecurity expert, and I don't even know if that does it justice. And so what I'd like to ask Greg is, in the context of cybersecurity and what it's going to look like in 2030, how do we weave in that fabric of trust in order to have it where it will be beneficial and productive down the road, and what do we need to do now?
Okay, well, thank you, Justin. Yes, I'm Greg Shannon. I'm from Carnegie Mellon University, where I'm the chief scientist for the CERT division within the Software Engineering Institute. And then I also work with IEEE, where I've been the chair for their cybersecurity initiative, working in cooperation with the Internet initiative that Justin's involved in. So the fabric of trust is really part of what people are discovering as they engage ICTs, that it extends their boundaries, extends their ability to engage. For those of us in the West, though, we're coming to understand that it's a much more nuanced and complex challenge when we're dealing with things like denial of service attacks coming off of Internet of Things. We're worrying about fake news. We're worrying about, does our system, can we trust our systems? Can we trust the way the infrastructure is put together? And there's really 4 components that go into that. There's security, privacy, resilience, and accountability. And I think as various cultures and societies are recognizing that accountability is actually one of the key things. from a technology point of view, which is, with IEEE, where we come at things from, what's the science and technology we can provide to help in this ethical challenge and this policy area. It's about creating technologies that ensure that there's accountability. That you don't necessarily have to take someone's word that, yes, I went down the checklist, that it's actually baked into the technologies. So the notion that things are secure from the start, privacy is designed in, there's a sense of resilience, the kind of the anticipation that there's going to be failures that we don't yet understand, but some sort of failure will happen, and being able to be resilient to that. And then the accountability, so that we can, as society, as we have issues of right and wrong, we can go back to those who break that trust as they use these ICTs. And we're seeing this evolution. I expect it to continue over the coming decades. But it's really about us all being mindful of that and recognizing that we have to critically question, can I trust this? What does it take for me to trust this more? There's been some interesting cases in Africa in particular in terms of delivering ICTs into the population, where properly engineered systems that take into account, say, security and the notion of prepaid cards and using proper encryption, proper protocols for ensuring that someone can't steal your prepaid card or can't create fake prepaid cards, make an ecosystem based on ICTs that everyone can trust, whether it's the incumbent organizations, the government, or the consumers. And so really this interweaving of security, privacy, resilience, and accountability is really essential to having something that we all can trust going forward, especially as we bring on the next billion individuals and billion devices.
Thanks, Greg. That's really interesting. And when you talk about accountability, I guess whose responsibility is it to hold people accountable?
Well, so I'm going to punt on that. I'm going to say essentially the science and technology is to help identify who should be accountable, kind of what part of the trust process broke, and then it's up to society, different nations, different cultures, to make a determination. That's part of the governance issue, part of the multi-stakeholder approach in terms of, how do you resolve that issue? But it's about, to be accountable, you have to be able to point at some entity, some rule that kind of failed in providing that trust.
Thank you, Greg. I'm going to shift to Louise now. Yesterday we were having a good conversation, and you were discussing the different perspectives on this issue, and so I'd just like to let you pick up that conversation that we were having.
Great. Hello to everyone. My name is Louise Marie Urel. I'm a researcher at the Center for Technology and Society over in Rio de Janeiro. And first of all, I'd really like to thank IEEE, thank Justin, the Youth Observatory, which I'm part of, that also gave me this opportunity to be here. So it is a pleasure. Thank you so much. Well, first of all, I would really like to talk a little bit about, bring some questions so that we can have a nice dialogue over here, because I think that's the whole point of this session. So, well, talking about the relationship between privacy, ethics, and security and ICTs is already challenging. But thinking about the complex interaction between these issues in 2030 is taking the debate to a whole new level. So, which brings me to the point that I want to make here, which is talking about perspective. And I think at least we can see 2030 within 3 different perspectives. And the first one that I would like to highlight is the temporal perspective. And in this case, well, there's so many questions that arise when we think about it. How are technologies being built nowadays? Is it mostly to feed a supply and demand relationship? Is it to be competitive? Are we talking and are we taking the time to build durable technologies that actually take into account privacy as a fundamental asset rather than a purely economic asset? And the second perspective that I would like to highlight is the spatial perspective. Well, this perspective is translated as I see, and this is a trend that I also would like to highlight over here. For example, through the Internet of Things. We don't see anymore this difference, this space difference, like I'm gonna talk to someone in another country. It is not more about shortening distances. We see that ICTs are part of our lives, and it's taking over our homes, it's taking over our hospitals, it's taking every little aspect of our lives. So a kind of shift in our perspective of seeing how the relationship between ICTs and the spatial dimension. And the third one, and I think the most complex of all, that is transversal to all of these others, is the governance perspective, which Greg was already talking about a little. It is undeniable that these questions are complex and multifaceted challenges. There's so many layers and themes that we could deeply assess. Genetic databases, AI, IoT. Rather than thinking on one particular answer or solution, one solution for all of the privacy and security problems, we should think about how to promote dialogue and confidence between stakeholders, how to engage and include these different stakeholders. The same way as we are trying to make sense of our relationship with technology, private companies are trying to make sense of how to promote technological innovation in most diverse aspects of social, political, and economic dynamics. So governments are, on the other hand, also trying to make sense and juggling with the challenge of drafting normative frameworks that uphold rights and withstand the shifts in technological changes. Well, both temporal and spatial perspectives are normally taken for granted, especially when we talk about internet expansion, globalization. We tend to say it has shortened time and raised distances. Well, I believe when looking in and through these perspectives, we are seeing less temporal spatial reduction and more process of translation of the around us into bits and pieces of computer-managed, mediated information. As individuals, we are more distant from what is actually being decided, and sometimes we are rendered to a system where algorithms make choices that should or could be ours, and big data makes sense of what we are, either as fragmented bodies of information or as imperfect collections of what we are. It seems as if we're in part of this big wave, this undeniable trend of an interconnected life in the making. I see it. The bottom line for me is that it isn't simply due to the fact that it is out there that we should blindly accept it. Notwithstanding, this brings us to a very deep discussion of viewing ICTs as apolitical, as a technical that is devoid of social, political, and economic and subjective interactions. But the question I would like to point out today, and concluding also, is, are we building sustainable standards and policies capable of upholding trust between individuals and ICTs? Because what I see today is that the future where misconceptions regarding privacy and security reinforce surveillance not only as a means to massively collect, process, and store data, but as a process of consolidating what I believe is a trend for the next few years, and unfortunately is a kind of a pessimistic point of view, but a surveillance capitalism. With this in mind, I would like to conclude just saying that I would finalize with this brief collection of ideas, because I think that's what it is for us to debate, saying that perhaps there is no end to this in the making, because there is no absolute control of the multiple dynamics in these three perspectives and the many other perspectives that we can highlight. However, we can think critically and act to change paths through which we can navigate and consolidate collective understandings of security and privacy multidimensionally.
Thank you, that was excellent. Is it fair to say you're optimistically pessimistic?
Yeah, I think so. I think in the end, for example, when I hear experiences such as Maher's one, I think this brings us some hope. This brings us some other perspective of how to include privacy and security as something that is bottom up rather than decisions that are taken for us and that we don't have any control of it. So in some kind of way, I'm in this gray zone of optimism and pessimism. So yeah.
I think a lot of people are. So, and we do have a remote panelist. Are we ready to? Is the audio working for him?
Hi.
Hi, John. I'm going to let you introduce yourself, but first I just wanted to set the stage here for you, and that is you do a lot of work in the ethics of artificial intelligence and autonomous machines systems, and I know you're doing some extensive work right now in that, and my question to you is pretty much, what do we need to do now, right now, to ensure that the world in 2030 is productive and beneficial for all of humanity?
Excellent. Well, first of all, let me know if you can't hear me, or Justin, I know you have my phone number. You can text me if there's any technical difficulties.
Will do.
And second of all, just want to say I'm honored. Thank you so much for inviting me onto the panel. So thank you so much. And also really appreciate the comments that the other panelists have given so far. So a lot of what you'll hear me answering to your question, Justin, is a yes and to the great comments that have come before. Want to say too that although I am, in terms of my background, currently I am the executive director of a new program from IEEE called the IEEE Global Initiative for Ethical Considerations in Artificial Intelligence and Autonomous Systems. That said, I am speaking for myself as John today, not formally as a representative of IEEE, as it were. I think the thing about 2030, which is really critical to think about, there are a couple of paradigm level aspects of life today that we need to take into consideration with regards to how we want to move forward as a society. One is the idea of how we determine value in general. And I've been working a lot in the past few years in what's called the Beyond GDP movement, or Gross Domestic Product movement, in the sense that GDP, while it's an excellent measure for many financial aspects of what is value around the world, aspects of specie or money, it was not built when it was first designed by Simon Kuznets in the 30s. It was not designed to be a measure of holistic well-being. This is actually something he even specifically said. He said, don't let this become a measure of happiness or well-being. And it now is so deeply entrenched in our mindset, and by that I mean, I think around the world, that GDP sometimes is considered the be-all, end-all of value. It's really important to remember, especially when issues of like autonomous systems or autonomy comes up in general. And again, I'm not in any way trying to sound pejorative or negative. I'm just trying to make a statement of fact. When there is any economy in whatever part of the world that is using GDP as a primary measure of value, a lot of the modern idea of GDP has to do with exponential growth. So by exponential growth, I'm not talking about year-over-year normal growth adding in, cost of living. I'm talking about a sort of IPO quarterly shareholder profit mindset, which is not wrong or evil. Again, I'm not interested in using those terms. However, it is critical that as a society, we realize that if an organization, whether it be corporate, nonprofit, or any other, or even an individual, if their focus is primarily on exponential growth, they will likely choose, say, a measure or something that might have autonomy that could serve that growth faster. And in many examples, that may be great. That may be the right choice, meaning the ethical, moral, and economically sound choice. However, in my work and the work I'm doing for IEEE, what should be critical to note is it should not be the de facto choice. And by that, I mean, now is the time for humans to determine what are the values and what are the measures and metrics of value that we want to incorporate into the machines and systems that we're building. so that by 2030 we can look back and say, great, we imbued the right, quote, air quote, right values into these systems. And so, for instance, I love what Greg said earlier about accountability. A lot of times you hear talk of transparency with algorithms and systems, which is incredibly important. But I would say accountability is actually even more important, again, to echo what Greg said. Accountability, like the idea of the Internet of Things, where there's technological interoperability between two nodes or two parts of a system. Accountability, especially like in the standards world, means that when you present a standard, you also can present a certification system around that standard. And what that simply means is you are translating, as it were, how that standard is important to the users, but also providing a specific way for that standard, again, as it were, to be interpreted. So when it's interpreted, the certification lets you not just have a checklist to say, hey, I did these things I'm supposed to do, but the certification is designed to actually let you know, these are why I'm doing the things I'm supposed to do. The other quick thing, two other quick things I'll mention. One thing is, you hear a lot of talk these days about algorithmic bias. And I think one thing that we need to also remind ourselves now, as we move towards 2030, is bias is not necessarily bad. We are all biased because we are humans. And by that I mean we all have our subjective truth. We come from different places. We're male, we're female, we're a certain age. Again, these are not, quote, bad or wrong things. But the transparency and accountability of systems and work in algorithms can help you recognize where bias, based on the group that you're targeting or working with those algorithms, is negative. And by negative, I mean these are established before you put the algorithm into place, that there may be racial aspects, meaning negative racist or racial aspects to these algorithms. There may be, in terms of the development goals, there may be aspects of these algorithms which are targeting only one very specific, say, wealthy part of a population or the world. And that means the algorithm is not giving universal value. There certainly is a lot of issues with algorithms these days with male and female issues, meaning gender equality. These are all things, however, we can't just say, hey, let's not have biased algorithms. We have to take the time beforehand to establish whether it's IRBs or other ways that we can determine and say these are the types of tools we'd like to use to help the programmers and the engineers and the scientists creating these things. Last quick comment that I'll make now, again, sort of mirroring what Greg said, but this now is the work that we're doing in the global initiative that I'm executive director for, is to really help help provide a new way of innovation for how systems and technology are built. And in general, and I'll close here, I have about another 60 seconds and then I'll stop talking, but you got me on my soapbox, so thank you. Basically, in general, and again, I am not inferring in any way that this is, I'm not trying to be pejorative, I'm just saying in general, how a lot of technology is designed today, the sort of de facto way it's designed, is an idea for, say, a new phone or a new widget comes from senior management. Hey, we want to have a new version of X phone. The design then for that phone is sent to engineers or programmers or technologists to start building. Where there can be ethical difficulties is then when an engineer, programmer who's working on that new version of the phone discovers an aspect of how that product or service will be implemented with the end users of that system, that then they realize there's an ethical problem. Hey, we made this phone for moms and there's no privacy settings that will be useful for moms. So now the engineer goes back to management and says, hey, what about this issue for moms? Now again, because of the paradigm of GDP, like I explained before, in general, there becomes a pressure to say from the management, hey, listen, make the phone the way we designed it. We have to get our quarterly numbers in. The phone has to get made. And then when that happens, then the engineer or programmer in general has a couple of choices. Build what they've been told to build or become a whistleblower. And that system is one that doesn't work for anybody. Doesn't work for management because those individuals are pressured to get the job done, but they may be risking a lot of aspects of how it's going to get done. They're risking their brand, et cetera. It doesn't help the engineer, the person in the middle, because they feel threatened. It does not help the end user, because the mom in that example does not have the privacy-enabled phone that she wants. So the work that we're doing is about, there's new whole ways of actually methodologies for design in general. They're called things like value-sensitive design or values-based design. And they're really modeled after the privacy by design paradigm that you already have all inferred and talked about. And on top of, and I'm happy to talk more about this later, Justin, but on top of the privacy and security and identity issues for individuals being sorted out, the logic here is empowering, along with the existing codes of ethics all these organizations have used for years, which can be most of the time very helpful. This new process of actually designing technology means that management, along with engineers, programmers, marketers, whoever, before a product design is sent to programmers or engineers, use these new very rigorous ethical methodologies or applied ethical methodologies, again called like value-sensitive design, et cetera, to really best understand the values of the end users using the technologies or products. Then that way you can build at the front end, the design that goes to the engineers, et cetera, is one that you've done your best to provably align will match the values of the end users. So if that's the type of thing that we can get going universally for anyone building these technologies today, that's our mission in the initiative. And that way it takes pressure off of everyone in the ecosystem. Because also, by the way, my final point is that then the shareholders or people making money, where there may not always be as much money in each quarter, there's a longer term sustainability of knowing you're giving value to the end users of your products or services that build trust, that do still make profit, right? And also, this is a term I've been using to talk about sustainability, is sort of ethics is the new green in that sense. 10 years ago, companies realized that their products, when they were making their products that were going to help the environment, could be something that could be defining their brand, not by spin or bad PR, but by letting their customers and stakeholders, end users, employees know we care about the environment, we care about the planet. That became a huge part of defining their brand. Well, now that same message, instead of it being just about the planet, it is also about people. We want to sustain the values and the trust of the people that we care most about. Anyway, hope that helps. And again, thank you. I'm really honored to be here today.
Well, as you can hear, the room enjoyed what you said. I did have, in a sentence or two, a quick question. Do you, is it fair to say that you think that corporations might want to incorporate a chief ethics officer as in their C-suite?
Yes, and thank you for saying 1 to 2 sentences. That was very smart of you. Yes, although I would probably say chief values officer, because sometimes I've found in corporate circles, again, I totally understand this. I worked as an EVP at a top 10 PR firm with clients like P&G for years. The word ethics is often associated in the corporate arena with things like, or only with things like compliance and risk. So when you say the word values, I think that's a more holistic, exciting way to then move that individual who would be the chief values officer to have the same level of importance as, say, the chief marketing officer, which is where I think they definitively need to be for the modern organization.
Great, thank you. I just want to ask the remote moderators, do we have any questions from? No? Okay. You know I said I was going to get to the questions by 9:30. I'm a little bit over that, so I'd like to open up the floor for questions. I challenged you yesterday at the booth, so so Julia, go ahead. Press the center one. Yes.
Oh, here, it's working. It's not a question, but it's a food for thought for everybody. Hello, my name is Julia. I'm from the Youth at IGF program, and I'm friend with Louise Marie. And one thing that got my attention is all these issues you guys presented on education, ethics, security, and innovation, digital technologies in specific. This drives me towards a reflection on how innovation is driven and how it should be driven. Like, this is curious because we usually, when we talk about technology and specifically about digital technologies, we take this as a neutral institution, and it's a homogeneous institution, like not consciously, but in our speeches we do it. But actually, this is not true. Like, we have innovation not as an end in itself, but rather as means where humans try to solve their issues. And this is kind of obvious, right? But at the same time, this is not, because we forgot that in order to a technology to work towards empowerment of the whole and real society, it should have the real society represented and taking action over it, and not only a part of the society, not only a part of the state, and not only a part of the private sectors, that sometimes is not even a part of the specific society. So, to be short, in order to see digital public policies and responsibilities towards ethical issues of these technologies, we should instead take this as a part of top stakeholders only.
Okay.
And finally, I believe that, let me be short, sorry.
So let's stop there. And
Okay, sorry.
that's okay. I know you're very passionate. Could you turn your mic off? Thank you. Greg?
So I'll pick up on the innovation angle that you mentioned. That yes, it's not its own end. It's towards a particular purpose. I think what's interesting about the ICTs is that they, with a trustworthy environment, it can facilitate innovation, because really what's key there is diversity of thought. And as you're finding in Tunisia, being able to give people from diverse backgrounds access to these technologies, you come up with very innovative solutions to key problems that society has. And I think that's what's really exciting about ICTs and the sustainable goals, is that really it provides a mechanism to get there. But the diversity of thought is really the key actuator there.
Anybody else want to comment, or I'll take another question from the floor? Okay, we have two. I saw your hand first there. So, and please keep the questions brief, and let's have it be a question for the panelists. Thanks.
James from Internet NZ. So in other fields, like in law, there's standard rules about you go to see a professional and they will do some things for you and not others. They won't present lies to a court. An accountant won't cook the books for you. What's the equivalent space of activities for a technologist?
So I hope others have answers to this. But
I have a feeling John might want to join that one also.
Yeah, well,
so you go first.
I think that I'll rephrase the question as, what shouldn't a technologist do? And I think the short answer that I've found professionally is not let the non-technologist be deluded about what a technology can or can't do. So I think it's about kind of an honesty about the technology. And I think this plays out important ways. If you look at the position that Europe has on genetically modified crops, a lot of that was a fallout of some failed honesty on the behalf of scientists and regulators about mad cow disease, about other threats that were popular at the time, and it caused society to say, no, we don't want GMOs. Elsewhere in the world, it wasn't an issue because there wasn't this loss of trust. So I think really being transparent about what you know about a technology, what its limits are, what its constraints are, and not letting non-technologists be deluded is really an important role.
That's really interesting, and I guess that kind of gets to another point. Is but
Hey, Justin.
John,
Oh, sorry.
there we go. Okay, John, I knew you were there, John.
Well, I guess one thing, and this may not directly answer the question, so forgive me if it's a bit tangential, but at least in the artificial intelligence and autonomous technology realm, which to me now, when you say artificial intelligence, when you get practitioners in the room, that can mean a world of different things. It can mean cognitive computing, deep learning, machine learning. You have to ask, are we talking artificial superintelligence where things have sentience, et cetera? But as of today, when I say artificial intelligence, to me, it's a synonym like for the internet, right? Like when someone says, there may be artificial intelligence or autonomous technology in X. In 2030, it will be hard to find things where they are not there. Like, maybe grass, but even grass or trees will certainly have sensors in them. Anyway, all that to say, one thing I think, especially for this panel, to really consider thoroughly, especially for kind of average citizens, and I'm from the States, so I'll talk about the States, is when you hear the word privacy in terms of personal data, it can turn people off because they're tired of the conversation. Whereas with AI and autonomous technology, everything starts with the data. And what that means is that we have to get, in my opinion, we have to get out of the framework of thinking about the word privacy regarding personal data as being something that is only in one sense left up to an individual's preference. Because I can prefer to share my data with everybody, advertisers and whoever. A different person may feel like, no, I don't want to share my data. That's great. And again, it varies based on regions around the world and countries. Westerners in general tend to be a little bit more individually focused about their data. Sometimes in the East, it's more community focused. Nonetheless, all that is a preface to say, fundamentally, today, there is a massive asymmetry in terms of how data is gathered by systems that track people versus how individuals, whether they prefer to be an individual, community, whatever, how individuals access that data, talk about their data, and provide conditions about how they'd like that data shared. This conversation usually gets a lot of emotion going because especially people think, oh, you're anti-corporate if you want to control the data, and my answer is that could not be farther from the truth. Individuals need to help corporations and organizations define what their data means as it is attached to their identity. Because in general, there's two ways to track, right? Or I should say, right now, today, we are tracked thousands of ways, online, in the real world, CCTV cameras in the real world, as it were, online through chatbots, through algorithms. We are tracked 1,000 different ways. That does not mean that is bad, but it does mean that other actors and organizations are in one sense literally defining our identity for us to people outside of who we interact with. And why that's so critical in the next 5 years, let alone by 2030, is when virtual reality and mixed reality become ubiquitous. Granted, it may come in the Western areas or developed places first, and you put lenses over your eyes or speakers over your ears, where you are literally putting that lens in front of everything you see. Where individuals have not defined their data, where they literally haven't said, okay, I'm John Havens, here is what, I'm a male, I'm this religion, I'm that, and then you attach it to identity, I live in the United States, etc. Where I haven't done that with a proven identity source, whether it be a US passport or the UN, then it is not done. It's binary. It is A or B. Where we are going to have a really interesting and tough time is in 5 years when a lot of people put on these lenses and glasses and realize, wait a second, I am not in control of my identity. And this is not an issue, say, like, a refugee situation, which is so dire, like with Syria, etc. This is a data refugee. We will not have access to or control over our identities. That is critically important today, December 16th, 2016, for us to manage. And anyway, that's something, it's a paradigm shifter that I really want to make sure we talk about.
Okay, thank you, John. I do want to kind of spin this question to the two of you over here. So we heard about, the question was based on lawyers can do certain things and they can't do certain things, like lie on the stand and things like that. Now, from your perspective of educating people on ICTs and when you were talking about governance and everything, how important do you think it is that the technologists explain the actual technology as best as they can so A, people feel comfortable using it, and B, policymakers have enough understanding of the technology to put forth proper regulations?
Well, from my experience, we're working with educating children. So providing the technological means, like the computers or the whatever technological solution we're using, is not enough. We have to educate the teachers who are going to be using it to teach the children. So you have to teach them very well what is this technology, how it works, because we're talking about something very delicate here, educational content. So if you don't provide something very secure, something that you understand very well, and you're aware of everything that might come up on it, so it's like educational content there shouldn't be any interference. Like the information that is diffused to children has to be very secure and has to be controlled by, of course, by the government and whoever is responsible for this. So yes, the technologists must explain everything regarding this technology, and especially in this field, because we're dealing with something very delicate, and which is, of course, education.
So that is a very challenging question. First of all, because from personal experience, we had this meeting in the middle of the year, the Youth Lack IGF, and over there we got some students that were still at school, and we talked to them and we had this great discussions. And one of the first things before I answer the question is I'm quite skeptical of reinforcing sometimes the division between technical and non-technical, because I think it brings a gap, such a huge gap in terms of practical issues when we start talking about that. But on the other hand, in thinking about making comfortable for both sides, I don't know if I have an answer to that. I don't know if I have a solution for that, but I think it is part of a process of building trust between both, because this dichotomy, this relationship that was built between non-technologists and technologists just brings them so far away from each other. So when they sit down at the table, sometimes they don't even know where to start. So I think one possible way is to promote simply dialogues. I don't know, universities try to bring people that work actually in this practical side of actually writing code and being part of this in the making of ICTs, and people who are actually, they don't know anything about ICTs. They don't know how it is a black box for them, for policymakers, many policymakers. And I say from personal experience, over in Brazil, there are very remote states in Brazil that there's actually, it's difficult to get information there, not because we don't have internet or because of, it's also because of that in some sense, but it is actually difficult to communicate sometimes with these policymakers. There's no funding for these ICT guys to go there, or there's no funding for different initiatives to just roll around the country and start promoting these kinds of dialogues. So before this question of promoting a comfortable space, I think we should think about practical measures on the ground to promote ways of getting them to the table and just talking, because I think we're lacking so much on that. So.
Okay, so I know Jim, we have a remote question. So just hold on no, you don't, okay. So I saw, okay, I have 4 hands that I've seen so far. I have here, there, and here. So we're gonna go in that order, and then I'll let that go, and then I'll look, depending on time, for a new queue. So you have the floor.
Hello, it's Yolanda from ISOC, I suppose. I just have a question. It's very simple, really. It's like, what is privacy? Is there such a thing as privacy in this digital space? Because the minute you have an email address, you already say, I accept the terms and conditions without even reading them. So my thing is there such a thing? And I mean, what do we mean by privacy? apart from, second question is, we're talking about personal data and all these things, but where is Google, where is Facebook at the table? So I think it's great for us to have these conversations, but at the same time, we need to talk to the people, or at least the companies who are holding our data. So, you know, I think if there's anyone here who can probably share, it would be great. Thank you.
Okay, we're going to go to Louise, and I know John just texted me that he wants to answer this too. So, so believe me, I'm not being rude. I'm just texting with John over there. So, no, go first, please, please.
Okay, so the big question, what is privacy? I don't have an answer for that. Definitely, I don't have an answer for what is privacy. But what I know, and especially when you talk about terms of service and being more accountable, I think that that is right on spot on the accountability and transparency debate, because we don't have any ideas. Because most of these terms of services, they change whenever they like. So there's no accountability. We don't know actually what is happening, what are the practices behind those standards and regulations. So I think it's part of a process of really trying to build trust. I don't know how to get them to the table, because there's so many problematic aspects in the middle, especially, for example, in Brazil, with the WhatsApp case, for example, and it is really difficult because it created a very huge gap between the policymakers and those law enforcement agencies and the companies, the private companies. There's no dialogue. So it's really difficult when you have this kinds of situation. So this is one point. And the other one, I don't know how many of you saw, but yesterday night, I think it was 11 UTC, Google, Facebook, Twitter, and Microsoft, if I'm not mistaken, like all the huge companies, they decided that they're going to start trying to take down content related to terrorists. So, but there's no transparency. What are the standards that are being applied? So it's kind of what we were talking, I was talking 2 days ago with people from EFF. It's shadow regulation. So there's so many opaque spaces, but yeah, just trying to add to the point.
Oh, that's great, thanks. And I'm gonna go to John briefly, and then Greg.
Yeah, I think it's critical we stop using the word privacy. I'm not interested in defining privacy anymore. Here's why. There's 700 definitions of privacy, and they all may be valid based on the user. And by the way, I'm not trying to be facetious, because it's an important word. That said, let me give an example. In the United States a few years ago, Google, and I love Google, I'm using Gmail as we speak, well, not as I speak, but it's a great company. They have a wonderful program called Street View that maps the planet. However, in the States, they struggled, and I think still are struggling, with a legal case where their cars, as they drove around, could mine unencrypted Wi-Fi data. Now, a lot of people, at least my friends in the States, don't know what that sentence means. Hey, they mined unencrypted Wi-Fi data. That is, they don't know what that means. However, it may be a bad analogy, but I can decide to leave my house unlocked. Correct? Anywhere in the world. In the United States, I live in New Jersey, I can leave my house unlocked. That does not mean it is okay for someone to steal my things. Those are, again, binary decisions, legal, correct? My house is unlocked. You may call me a fool. You may say, hey, maybe lock your door, but it is still illegal for someone to walk in and steal. I think that is an apt metaphor to say, just because I may not encrypt my Wi-Fi so that people can steal it, as an average citizen being protected as a consumer, I need to be protected. So the privacy a lot of times gets us back to preference. We need to move beyond preference. Modern, broken. If there's a 50-page document that someone needs to read to get the new version of iTunes, that means it needs to be updated. We are talking about machines having human-level sentience. It is also time to update the nature of how people understand and connect to the companies they want to genuinely trust. Google, Facebook, all of those folks can be the leaders in this area. And again, I do not mean to sound condemnatory by Street View. However, it is a great example of, let's move beyond the privacy debate and where someone's rights can be protected, We protect them first, and then the preferences come after.
Thank you, John. Greg, and then, yeah.
So I don't have a definition for privacy, though the one thing that I think is helpful to consider is if you look back 1,000 years ago or 10,000 years ago and try and understand what privacy means, it's a fairly modern concept. If you're living in a tribal community, everybody knows what you're doing. They know everything about you, and they've known that your whole life, and you're never going to really escape that, for better or for worse. And I think, it's not clear to me that the anonymity that people, that also goes with privacy often, is really, it's a modern experiment, essentially, that we've had this degree of anonymity. And so I think ultimately it'll be a social contract. It's a set of norms, and that's going to evolve. And in 2030, it may be quite different than what we have, than what we think of today.
And Louise, I know you wanted a quick follow-up, so.
Okay, no, it's a really, really quick follow-up from John's speech. I just like to work with the metaphor that you were talking about, John. And, well, I think when we think about our lives and our homes, we're thinking about when we walk into our home, we're thinking we're in a safe space. We're walking in a place that there's a lot of locks and doors, and we feel comfortable there because we're safe. But just adding to this metaphor, when we think of IoT, there's no in and out. There's no boundary. It exceeds the notion of a private space. So I think when we think about shifting ideas and notions of privacy, we should think also about how diluted it will become. It's not more of a spatial thing. It's much different. It is not home as a safe space. And if we don't try to tackle the question of trust, I think it is really critical. So I just wanted to point out this home as a safe space, and as we continue in this trend, an undeniable trend of hyperconnectivity, I think we won't have these spaces. And I don't know if we, like people that are being born now and they're living in this world, hyperconnective world, if they're gonna have the same view that we have today, if it's gonna be okay to them that we're just not having home as a safe space and everything's gonna be connected, and that we should just try to fragment this privacy as part of different gadgets and devices. So just food for thought.
Okay, Maher, and then.
Yeah, just a quick remark. Now, Louise started talking about IoT and how everything is now connected to the internet, and how privacy is like fading away because you decided to put things like your belongings to the internet. And imagine in perhaps like, I don't know, 20 or 30 years, we're going to be talking about nano IoT. That means parts of your body will be connected to the internet. And if you took that decision that you want certain parts of your body connected to the internet, so I think there's no longer any privacy whatsoever.
Okay, and then last, very, very, very briefly, John texted me he wanted to get a few sentences in.
Smart to give me 3 varies. No, I get to choose where my identity goes. In the future, identity is what we should be thinking about versus privacy. To the last comment, I couldn't agree more. I may be sharing aspects of the neurons in my brain. I may be sharing aspects of my identity. But privacy being dead, or the home space, it's a great example. But the home space has Nest. It has all the different connected devices. The home space is not, quote, private. However, when I put on virtual reality goggles, et cetera, I should still be able to say, through the use of what is commonly called a personal cloud, a personal information management system, I am allowed to, and I believe I have the right to create an algorithmic level version of my identity that is not necessarily where I own all the data created about me, but I do have a voice. I have a subjective truth. I get to be a citizen of the, quote, world, capital W, in any environment for any time in the future where I say who I am.
Okay, thank you. And first off, that was a great question. And now you over here, you've got a tough follow-up. So, and also I neglected to mention if you could just state your name and affiliation before asking your question. Thanks.
Hello. Yes, I'm Nicholas, part of the University of Duisburg-Essen in Germany. So nowadays people provide a lot of personal data voluntarily to service providers on the internet. This can be analyzed in the sense that users are not emotionally attached to their private data somehow. So how do you think that we as designers of media technologies can contribute to build that emotional tie between users and their personal data? If there's a chance to generate such a thing.
I guess one approach is to give people examples. And I think it also goes back to the sense of education. It's about educating students early about what the consequences are of that data and to build stories around that connection and to show how the mechanisms of the internet take your data and create a something that you viscerally may be concerned about. And it gets to some of John's comments about identity, that how sharing your data does define your identity. Whether or not you have control over or not, that's another issue, but to help them understand that what they choose, the choices they make will influence that and how that actually carries out.
Okay, thank you. So let's see. I have a cue here. I'm going to. Oh wait, John. I knew that was in your wheelhouse. I was waiting for you to text me back. So I know you wanted to touch on this briefly. So then we'll move to the next question.
Yeah, I know I'm overly passionate, and I get to be remote and be passionate. So thank you, everybody. I think it's, when I talk to people about this, right now today, I go on a plane in February to travel to London, and I live in the States. I have a blue document that's called a passport. It doesn't ask me about preferences or whatever, but it does give me a tool that right now today is recognized around the world. Is it perfect? That's another discussion. Attaching aspects of my identity to that type of recognized document is what I'm saying we need to consider and implement for the future. Because, for instance, what can be tracked about me a lot of times inaccurately in the States through third-party data brokers are things like where I live, my gender, my race. This is why I bring this up is because I work in the AI space, and erroneous data is one of the biggest problems of creating good systems. Where an individual can say, hey, all these wonderful companies who want to build this great stuff for me, if I can't access and be allowed to potentially correct errors, you're going to be building off erroneous data. That's one. Secondly is, you may track everything I do. You will still not know unless you ask me, for instance, how I identify via my gender. Am I male? Am I female? Do I identify a different way? You will not know my faith. You may track me going to church, but I may do that because I have a job there as a janitor. I don't actually believe in that faith orientation. These are all things algorithmically, you can know what I ate 4 months ago to an incredibly granular degree. But if we don't start asking people about these values-oriented questions, we build systems that are based on tracking from outside in and don't ask about the inside out.
Okay, thanks, John. And just to everybody here, I'm going to close the queue for now because we have a bunch right here. And but first, before I go down to you, we do have a remote question, I believe. We have
yes, we have.
the remote. Okay, great.
Can you put it back on the Okay, sorry. Okay, so it says, recently in the Portuguese Internet Governance Initiative was discussed that the argument that users must have full control over their own data implies, alongside a better preparation of users and consumers to this process through proper skills and training. It is clear that a greater responsibility and accountability of actors who provide services and products over the internet is required, and the by design and by default principles should be a private sector priority, which could reduce eventually government regulation. In the meanwhile, are we living, as Schneier once said, in a fear and convenience internet environment regarding to privacy and security? And he's got a question mark at the end of that, so it's, I guess, asking for comment on that point of view.
You know, the notion of controlling your own data, and I think this probably disagrees with John's view on this. Well, one, we do not have the technology today to give the consumer that choice. It does not exist unless you more or less create a very outdated, old, and broken system, and I think most of us would not want to use it. It'd be so constrained. So the technology does exist. Second thing, I think epistemologically, I think it's a question about, you know, what does it mean to control data? You know, if I have a camera here and I accidentally take your picture, does that mean you control my picture? I don't think that socially we're going to kind of accept that. So I think there's some hard questions that we have to ask when someone says, I want to control my data. It's like, well, you know, do you really understand what that means? And I don't think we do. That said, you know, it's important we do have that conversation. But I think it's you know, we can't assume the answers are easy or obvious.
Just a quick follow-up. I totally agree with the points Greg raised. And another thing that I would add, imagine if we had, and I'm not saying that I'm not in favor of some control or if it does have beneficial aspects, but just trying to challenge this question. If we had control of our data, total control of our data, and we decided to use it for economic purposes, if we wanted to earn something, if we wanted to sell our data, if we had control and we wanted to just share our data and receive money as in return. So I don't know if that's the way. I don't know if that would be beneficial. And I think that it's a very challenging question. But yes, just wanted to add on that.
John?
Well, first of all, something, you know, again, I couldn't agree more. It's challenging, but it may be the nature of my work the past couple of years. I will have a phone call with someone who will say to me, and they mean it, and they're the expert, within 20 years, this device will have human-level sentience. That to me seems like a challenge. That's a challenge. And by the way, I'm not, again, trying to be facetious in any way. It is a challenge to make these updates to how we think about data. However, to one of the last points, instead of saying, can I control my data? I think the more important question is, will I be allowed to inform my identity? And what that means is, I can right now, today, it's hard, and people won't necessarily listen to me. But I can, even at an algorithmic level, with chyrons or bots, I can say, hey, and by the way, Mozilla has done a lot of wonderful work in this space. I can set up, essentially, terms and conditions about how I'd like my data to be used and shared. These will not always be relevant, meaning I in the States can say, here's how I want to share my data. I can attach it to my identity, whether it's via my passport or my phone. It can be algorithmic, so it can live in the cloud. But when I go from America to another country, I can say what I want. It doesn't mean it will happen, but it's still there. It's still out in the ether, as it were, invisible, saying these are the terms and conditions about how I'd like my data shared. And especially with commercial usage, just because laws right now, again, in the States, largely favor me not having access to my data. And it was only 2 years ago that in the States, I had access to my medical data. So let's also move the conversation beyond privacy and talk about life or death, literally. Only 2 years ago did HIPAA say that I could have access to my data where I wouldn't get it just beyond a fax or a written piece of documentation from my doctor. We must move beyond these ideas that just because these things are difficult, we shouldn't, really deal with them now, which I'm not saying any of you are. But again, let's move the conversation from controlling data to teaching individuals the utter essential paradigm shift of understanding their data. It's a primary asset of their lives. We have to empower the corporations, yes, and the GDPR we should probably talk about, because they have to do this as well by 2018 in Europe. It's a great way to say, if they're doing it, how can citizens be empowered with something similar? But again, the privacy conversation to me is something we need to evolve and help citizens have these tools to identify themselves so they have some say over how their data is used, even if it's just people can have, like you were saying earlier about accountability, my data was used here in a way that I have shown you beforehand I don't agree with. Then it becomes accountable, traceable, and usable.
Yeah, that's very interesting. I know, Louise, you wanted to just a brief, quick follow-up on that one.
I completely agree that it's not just because it's difficult we should just give up on that. I think it is important to keep on thinking about the challenges and opportunities that come with these debates, and just trying to bring another perspective on the subject of controlling data. And after making a quick comment to what John said, first of all, I think one thing that we should probably think about is data portability. If we perhaps in thinking of controlling data, of having some kind of control over our own data, we could like think of ways of, well, I'm using this app, I'm using this platform, but really I just want to go to the other platform. So I just want to go to this other service. So I just want to have a terms of service that allows me to get this data and just shift it to another platform. I think this would bring a lot of economic competition, but on the other hand, I think it's a nice idea to have control over your data. But on the other hand, just adding to what John said, and really quickly, the idea of having terms of service, individual terms of service, I think it's interesting, but on the other hand, I think about education, about people who don't have the slightest idea of what terms of service is, and who don't have any kind of digital education. They are not, I think this is another challenge that comes with connecting the next billion. So it's just difficult.
Well, you know, and this is what I find interesting. I keep hearing in this conversation, we've had a couple questions on people's data and privacy and everything. What about children? And the fact that guardians and parents are posting data, and perhaps some of them really, truly have really no idea what's done with the data. They just sign up for Facebook because it's fun. And they're posting a lot of information about children from the time they're basically born. And so I don't want to steal from the audience questions, but if I'd like to throw that out for a brief answer on that, if you have any thoughts.
Yeah, I think it depends on the level of awareness. So, like, for example, in Tunisia, most people are not really, they're not technological savvy. They don't know much about internet. So, as you said, when they join Facebook or anything, they just post it they just join it for fun, or I don't know, for an email account or something. They just do it for the service, but they don't really know what's going on down there, but behind the scenes. But recently, there's been lots of, since the revolution in Tunisian revolution in 2012, there's been, lots of problems because lots of websites were closed, and the famous 404 not found, and people started knowing what is going on behind the scenes, and they began becoming more careful while posting stuff and so on. So I think it all depends on the level of awareness that people have. For our case, I think it's our responsibility. We brought this project, so we have to make sure that people understand, as we said earlier, that they understand all the terms, and they understand that we're going to be providing them with content that is controlled, and it's not something just random. So,
Okay, okay, John.
Oh, sorry. Moderators hate me because they say words like "be brief."
Very brief.
Well, in the States with children, there's something called the COPPA Act, C-O-P-P-A. So the kids under 13, there's very specific ways they're supposed to be addressed. So that's law.
Yeah, well, we all know, John, though, we all know that the under 13, they get around that one because the law is so loose, let's say, right?
Exactly, exactly. I think one thing to think about with the term children, which is critical, and another reason why I think adults, it's so critical to inform them about these issues about data, especially parents, is by the time you put on a pair of virtual reality goggles, the definition of age really goes away, right? Someone can say, I'm 13, and they're 30. Someone can likewise say, I'm 30, and they're 13. This again is why for me, and I am not in any way using this term lightly, when we put on these goggles and we look at, because literally if I'm John Havens, I put on mixed reality, not even virtual reality, mixed reality goggles where I can still see the quote real world with digital data overlaid it, I will start to potentially see other John Havenses as I walk around. And then I'll say, but I'm the real John Havens. And if I don't have a formal way through a government or different agency where I can point to, yeah, look, here's my passport, whatever, my driver's license, we're not going to have those for much longer with autonomous cars, but, and I can say, I'm the real John, then we won't have that. And it's the same for children. And again, I don't use this term lightly, but I quite literally think that is the same as human trafficking. Data, the data version of human trafficking is when our identity, right now we think of identity theft as people impersonating us to use our credit cards. It is going to be much more severe in 5 to 10 years, again, in the nations or places where people have these advanced mixed reality type tools. It's going to be pervasive that people will start to say, that isn't my identity, it's been hacked, and that entity over there is not the real me. That is why we need to do these things I'm talking about with not controlling your data per se, because people think that means intellectual property control or ownership. That's not what I mean to infer. But one should be able to say, this is my identity, I get to control or at least inform how that's related to the world.
Okay. And I know in the queue, I had a question right down here. Yeah, I know. You raised your hand a long time ago.
Yeah,
So.
that's fine. Still remember the question. My name is Limor Schmerling. I'm from the Israeli Data Protection Authority. And we are very much connected with the data protection authorities around the world, about 50 of us, even more. We have a network of regulators. And I was very interested to hear the panelists' views about what's the most crucial, urgent, effective thing that we regulators can do in order to prepare for this facing future that you have described here brilliantly and movingly. And I would really like you to pick one, perhaps legislate, enforce and sanction, raise awareness with the public, help the industry towards incorporating technological standards that have privacy protections in them, or anything else that you can think of. But taking into account we have limited resources always, what's your number one most important thing that we should be doing right now?
Okay, and I would say, as we answer this question, so we can get some more, that was a very good question. So yeah, you have your answer and a sentence or two, and then we'll move on to the next question.
And I'm writing this down, actually.
So, yeah, since you're thinking about a real answer, I'll give you a meta answer. What's the criteria of a good policy, of a good regulation? I think that's one of the things that I see as a challenge, that, what's the objective of the policy, and how do you know when it's successful? What's the evidence in terms of pilot, experiments, research, science that says this policy is likely to be successful to achieve the objectives stated? Many policies are stated with the objectives implicit, and so it's difficult to assess whether or not, before it's implemented and after it's implemented, whether or not it's going to be effective. So it's kind of a meta issue from my point of view.
Okay, I have a question right to my left here.
So my name is Marshall Hancock, and I'm with the GIIC, and my role in this is to look at children and the implication of the connections. And I just loved hearing John repeat over and over, people will make choices about our child because of what data has been collected about them and for them. People make choices about us, so about our opportunities. And I think one of the first places, so a follow-up question to your where could we start? The one place that we can, the Venn diagram in our cultures is we care about our children. And right now in the school systems, people are choosing commercial vendors to help teach their children how to use data. So if we can agree on creating some transparency and accountability on children, students' data, we can start there, because we don't have to boil the ocean. We can take a small piece, because unlike adults, children can't choose
I'm just
for
going to ask you to
themselves.
come to a question, or is that?
So the question is, what would it take in your location to be able to begin with transparency and accountability with the data used in schools? Yeah, a teacher picks, like some random teacher will just pick something.
Sorry, can you rephrase the question, please?
So another way to say that is, how are you in Tunisia selecting products that uses data of your students in a way that you understand? So we know where our students go on a field trip and in their classroom, but do we know where their data goes? What will it take for you to know where your students' data goes, since people make choices?
Okay, well, I think the very simple way to do that is to work with the government, because everyone, like everything that is official has to be in relation with the government. So we can use like data centers or something that they provide. We're not going to be improvising. We're not going to provide like like the students' information. We're not going to be treating these information, because we're like, we do the initiative, and we expect and push the government to help give us that kind of support, because even parents don't really trust that. Like one time we did training in a school, and the teachers were really kind of concerned. Like they didn't know what their children were studying, and even if we have like summer camps and stuff, they don't really trust it so easily. Like they have to go out there and see what's going on. So I think the easiest way is to do it with the government, because if your child is heading for a field trip or something with the school, then that's okay. That's not really a problem. And what we have, what we envision, what we plan on gathering, like the information that we plan on gathering, is like how to say it, like the school, the children's results, like the advancement, their marks. So it's not really that kind of delicate information. So it's like it's a way for parents to see how their children are advancing, their marks, their absences, stuff like that.
I really like the way you've scoped the question in terms of the schools, and I think that I kind of agree with you in terms of government, though I think in the U.S., you know, the notion of school boards and local governance in education, I think creates a real opportunity that, you know, local school boards, the school itself, could be the repository of the data and be the one that disperses the data, and that gives the parents access and control. It gives the local administration some reasonable policy. It allows for experimentation also, because it's not necessarily at a national level, it can be at a local level. So that's a really interesting way to really, yes. So the school could become the the agent, yes.
And can I just add here, as a resource, at least in the States, there's a company called Personal, PERSONAL.com. They actually have a program for students and educators where they teach kids about how to create what is essentially a personal data cloud for themselves. And in that way, the kids, in conjunction with the teachers and parents, can release data about those kids in ways that everyone feels comfortable.
Thank you. Okay, well, I thought we were going to have to wrap up, but I think we can take one more quick question, and oh no, yeah, I had the queue going though, unfortunately. I'm so sorry. I saw you earlier.
Yeah, thank you very much. I'm Peter Kimpian from Council of Europe, and I'm really glad to be here. I try to be very brief. It's a very interesting discussion I have been following. I like to join our Israeli colleagues As from the data protection authorities' point of view, it would be really important to give us some feedback how best we could serve you and we could serve the users. As at Council of Europe, we have Convention on Data Protection, which is an international convention which is open, and we have now a rising member of third states who are joining our convention, so it's getting really international. So and we have a committee who is, for example, at the beginning of 2017, so in some weeks, it will issue recommendation on big data. It will answer, or at least try to answer, all your questions you put here. What is privacy? What is personal data in big data environment? And so on and so forth. But what we are really lacking is the dialogue with you, with your community. So there's twofold, my intervention was a twofold intervention. I just wanted to thank you for this interesting panel. I would really recommend you to use soft law as recommendation of international organization. It can be very, very, very useful for you, and to enhance dialogue between communities. Thank you.
Well, actually, because it's about time to wrap up, I'm going to take that one. Moderator prerogative. That was actually on one of my lists of wrap-ups. Cooperation amongst all the stakeholders in a meaningful way to come to these conclusions and have these discussions and make these decisions on any of the issues, just as we were just discussing about children in schools and the data, how that data is used. And that's one of the reasons why a venue like this is vital to start that process. But the key is it needs to keep moving afterwards, and the conversations need to keep going because, excuse me, the topics that I saw that really need to be discussed in further depth, in quite a bit of depth, was accountability, transparency, educating people, even to the point of educating them on the actual aspects of the technology so they can understand it better, educate the policymakers so they can make better decisions. And that we need to really consider what is the definition of privacy moving forward, considering the IoT aspect and the nano, so these are the things that we have to do. And this conversation must continue afterwards. And I encourage everybody here to take what you learned here. I hope you learned something, and I hope that you got something out of this. Take this back home and take it and use this and build on this, and because we need to have a solid 2030. I mean, we don't want to have the world be a mess, and now is the time to act to do that. And so I'd like to really thank the panelists here, Greg, Louise, Maher, John, and I'd also really like to thank everybody here in the audience, the remote moderators also, and all the staff here. And I would like to thank everybody here. Your questions were phenomenal. Your attention was phenomenal, and I truly appreciate it. Thank you.
It's nice, my first response